Hey guys, tonight we wander barefoot across frozen earth, breath puffing white in the dark, as a medieval village settles in for another long winter night. You can hear the distant crack of wood splitting in the cold, smell damp smoke clinging to low roofs and livelihoods, and feel frost creep through layers that never quite seem thick enough. This is not the cozy, candlelit medieval aesthetic from your favorite fantasy series. This is real cold, the kind that seeps into bones and stays there. And honestly, you probably won't survive this, at least not without central heating, thermal socks, and a strongly worded complaint to your landlord. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. As you settle in, feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments, because somewhere out there, someone is listening to this while it's snowing for real. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are a medieval peasant, and winter has officially arrived. The first frost comes quietly. One morning you wake to find the ground stiff beneath your feet, the soil no longer forgiving, the air sharp enough to sting your lungs. Winter isn't marked by a calendar date for you. It announces itself through itching fingers and the way water skins over with ice before sunrise. This moment matters because in medieval life, winter isn't just a season. It's a test, a slow, months-long exam where the only passing grade is survival. Mainstream historians agree that most medieval peasants lived dangerously close to the edge even in good years. Winter magnifies everything: hunger, cold, illness, fear. The harvest is in, yes, but now there's no more growing, only rationing. You look at your stores, grain sacks, salted meat, maybe a wheel of hard cheese, and mentally calculate how long they might last. This isn't budgeting in a spreadsheet. This is counting meals with your stomach already half empty. You pull your cloak tighter, wool rough against your neck. Wool is your best friend now. Linen is fine in summer, but winter belongs to sheep. A fun little historical fact to lull you towards sleep: wool retains heat even when damp, which is lucky, because everything you own is at least a little damp. Rain, snow, breath, smoke. It all settles into the fabric of your life. Somewhere down the line, people will invent waterproof jackets. That day is not today. There's a certain stillness that settles over the village as winter arrives. Fields lie empty and stiff. Tools are stacked and repaired rather than used, and the rhythm of days slows. You notice how sound travels differently in cold air. Footsteps crunch. Doors creak louder. Even voices seem hushed, as if everyone instinctively knows that shouting wastes energy, and energy is warmth. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some medieval people believed winter itself was caused by evil winds trapped underground, escaping during certain months. Not everyone bought into that, of course, but when you're standing in ankle-deep snow with numb toes, blaming malevolent air spirits feels emotionally satisfying. Historians still argue whether these beliefs genuinely influence behavior or simply coexisted alongside practical knowledge, but either way, winter had a personality, and it wasn't friendly. As night falls earlier and earlier, darkness becomes another enemy. Without artificial lighting beyond candles and rushlights, evenings stretch long. You feel the pull to sleep not because you're tired, but because there's nothing else to do that doesn't burn precious fuel. Firewood is stacked carefully now, each log representing warmth later. You don't toss wood into the hearth casually. Every crackle is a small investment. This is where the social side of winter begins to show. You're not facing this alone. Medieval peasants survive winters together, by necessity. Villages are tight-knit not because of sentimental community spirit, but because cooperation keeps people alive. You help your neighbor patch a wall, they share a bit of smoked pork. It's less holiday goodwill and more mutually assured survival. There's a low-level anxiety humming beneath everything. You feel it when the wind rattles the shutters at night. You feel it when someone coughs too long. Winter illnesses are common, and nobody really understands why. Cold air is blamed, bad humors are blamed, sometimes witches are blamed. Always comforting. A mainstream historical fact here. Respiratory infections spike in winter months in medieval records, though explanations varied wildly. Treatment ranges from herbal teas to prayers to doing absolutely nothing and hoping for the best. Medical care, as you can imagine, is more vibes than science. You notice how your body adapts. Movements become economical. You hunch without thinking. You keep your hands busy just to feel them. Modern you might complain about a chilly office, but medieval you is playing full contact sport with hypothermia and losing slightly less badly than last year. That's the goal. There's also boredom, which doesn't sound dangerous until you realize boredom leads to restlessness, and restlessness leads to mistakes. Winter accidents happen. Slips, poorly judged trips in the dark. You learn to sit still, to listen, to conserve. And yet, there's something strangely grounding about this moment. The world narrows. Your concerns become immediate and tangible warmth, food, light. No emails, no news alerts. Just the soft animal sounds nearby, the crackle of the hearth, the steady breathing of others sharing the same space, the same cold. You don't know how harsh this winter will be. Weather prediction is limited to folklore and observation. A red sunrise, a certain bird's behavior, the thickness of onion skins. Yes, really, are all read like almonds. Historians still argue whether these signs had any statistical accuracy, but believing in them gives you a sense of control, and control is comforting when nature holds all the power. As you settle into this first winter night, wrapped in wool and uncertainty, you realize something important. Survival here isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It's repetitive. It's enduring one cold night after another, trusting that spring will eventually remember you exist. You wake before dawn, not because you're rested, but because the cold nudges you out of sleep like an impatient neighbor. The air inside the house is only marginally warmer than outside, and livelihoods, and you can see your breath even before your eyes fully open. This is where your home earns its keep. Medieval peasant houses aren't designed to impress anyone. They're built to survive, and warmth is the primary currency. You take a slow look around, because there isn't much else to do. The walls are thick, usually made of wattle and daub or rough stone. Materials chosen less for comfort and more for availability. Wattle is a lattice of woven sticks, a sticky mixture of mud, straw, dung, and water. Yes, dung, not glamorous, but effective. A mainstream historical fact here: animal doing adds fibrous strength and helps seal gaps, making walls surprisingly good at blocking drafts when maintained properly. Think of it as medieval insulation, minus the home improvement show sponsorship. The house is small on purpose. Heat is precious, and a tiny space is easier to warm. High ceilings are a terrible idea when warmth rises and immediately abandons you. So the roof slopes low, forcing you to duck slightly, a constant reminder to stay humble or concussed. Smoke darkened beams hang overhead, evidence of years of fires burning without chimneys. The smoke finds its own way out, slowly, grudgingly, coating everything in a thin layer of soot. It's not ideal for lungs, but it does help preserve the wood. Accidentally practical is sort of the medieval design philosophy. There's one central room, no hallways, no privacy. Everyone sleeps, eats, works, and exists in this shared space. You might have a small loft reached by ladder, where some family members sleep closer to the roof. Warmer up there, yes, but also smokier. Choose your poison. Historians still argue whether loft sleeping significantly improved warmth or simply traded cold for chronic coughing. But either way, people kept doing it, which suggests it was at least tolerable. The door is solid wood, thick and heavy, because thin doors leak warmth faster than gossip. Windows, if they exist at all, are tiny. Glass is rare and expensive, so openings are often covered with oiled cloth or animal bladder. It lets in a little light and blocks some wind, though calling it a window is generous. On especially cold nights, even these openings are stuffed with rags or straw. Natural light is great, but not at the cost of frostbite. Here's a quirky tidbit to tuck under your mental blanket. Some medieval houses were partially sunken into the ground. These grooby user or pit houses take advantage of the Earth's stable temperature. It's cooler in summer, warmer in winter. Not cozy exactly, but steady. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was among peasants in later medieval Europe, but where it existed, it shows a quiet understanding of thermal physics. Long before anyone called it that, you run a hand along the wall. It's cold, but not icy. That's a small victory. Gaps are the enemy. Every crack invites wind, and wind steals warmth faster than you can make it. Maintaining the house is constant work. Patching daub, replacing rotted wood, stuffing holes with whatever's on hand. Straw, rags, moss. If it blocks air, it's useful. You don't wait for things to fall apart. Winter doesn't give second chances. The floor beneath your feet is hard, packed earth, sometimes layered with rushes or straw. Over time, spilled food, ash, and general life grind into it, creating a surface that's resilient, not clean by modern standards, but warmer than bare stone. And yes, it smells faintly of everything that's ever happened here. You stop noticing after a while. Your brain adjusts. Survival over sensitivity. The hearth is the heart of the house, literally and symbolically. It sits in the center or against one wall. An open fire with no real chimney. Keeping it going through winter is a skill. Too small and you freeze. Too big and you waste wood. Or fill the house smokes so thick your eyes water. You learn to read the fire like a living thing. A good fire breathes slowly, steadily. It's almost meditative if you ignore the coughing. A light joke sneaks in here, because even medieval you needs one. This is basically an early version of open concept living, except instead of trendy furniture, it's everyone staring at a fire and trying not to die. Minimalism, but make it urgent. Your roof is thatched, usually straw or reeds, layered thick to shed water and trap air. Thatch is excellent insulation when done right. Snow settles on top, adding another insulating layer. Ironically, a good snow cover can make the house warmer. A bad one melts, refreezes, and leaks. Maintenance matters. Thatching is skilled labor, and a well-thatched roof is a sign of competence, not wealth. Inside these walls, sound is muted. Wind howls outside, but only whispers reach you. That's intentional. A quiet house loses less heat. You huddle closer to the center, where warmth pools. You understand instinctively what modern engineers will later formalize. Heat moves, and you want to slow it down. There's comfort here, of a sort. Not luxury, but familiarity. These walls have held against past winters. They remember storms. That memory matters. When the wind rattles outside, you trust the thickness around you. It's not perfect, but it's enough. As you settle back near the hearth, feeling a faint warmth seep into your bones, you realize the house isn't just shelter, it's a strategy. A carefully balanced response to a hostile season. Every choice, small windows, low ceilings, shared space, whispers the same messaging: stay warm, stay together, stay alive. And for now, the walls hold. You reach for your clothes before you even stand, because getting dressed is the first line of defense. There's no hopping into a hot shower, no radiator humming in the background. Warmth comes from layers, friction, and the quiet understanding that fashion is something other people worry about. Medieval winter clothing is practical, repetitive, and deeply committed to wool. You start with linen, the base layer. It's thin, scratchy when new, and already worn soft by years of use. Linen doesn't insulate much, but it does wick moisture away from your skin. That matters more than you might think. Sweat in winter is dangerous. A mainstream historical factor medieval people understood, through experience, that dampness leads to chill, even if they didn't know the science behind it. So linen goes on first, a humble but important barrier between you and the cold. Over that comes wool. More wool, possibly even more wool. Tunics, cloaks, all wool in varying degrees of thickness and itchiness. You pull on hose that are tied to your belt with cords, not because it's comfortable, but because buttons are still a novelty and zippers are a distant fantasy. Everything is adjustable, repairable, and slightly mismatched. Clothes are expensive relative to income, so you wear what you have until it nearly disintegrates. Wool smells faintly of sheep and smoke. That's just how it is. You stop noticing. Wool traps air, and trapped air is warmth. Even when damp, it keeps insulating. This is why medieval winters don't immediately kill everyone. Without wool, survival would be significantly shorter. Light joke moment. You're basically a walking sheep-themed burrito, and honestly, it works. You add a belt not just to hold things up, but to cinch layers close to your body. Loose fabric lets warm air escape. You've learned this the hard way. Over everything, you wrap a cloak. Cloaks are versatile blanket, pillow, windbreak, emergency privacy screen. The hood comes up, framing your face, cutting the wind. You can feel your breath warming the air inside. A tiny microclimate you guard fiercely. Here's a quirky tidbit to keep your brain gently occupied. Some medieval peasants stuffed extra straw or dried grass between layers for added insulation during extreme cold. It's bulky, uncomfortable, and makes you rustle when you walk, but it works. Historians still argue how common this practice was, but surviving in marginal climates encourages creativity. You do what you must. Footwear is challenging. Shoes are leather, turned shoes specifically, meaning they're stitched inside out and then flipped. Flexible, yes. Waterproof, not really. You wear woolen socks, sometimes 2 pairs, and hope the ground isn't too wet. Frozen mud is preferable to slush. Wet feet lead to numb toes, and numb toes lead to very bad days. You stomp occasionally, partly to keep blood flowing, partly out of habit. Gloves are rare, mittens even rarer. You might wrap your hands in strips of cloth or keep them tucked into your sleeves. When working, you alternate tasks, warming one hand while the other works. It's inefficient, but frostbite is worse. You blow into your hands, feel a momentary warmth, then get back to it. Breath is free, after all. One of the most important sources of warmth isn't clothing at all. It's other people. You stand close. You sit shoulder to shoulder. You share space because bodies generate heat, and shared heat is efficient. Privacy takes a back seat in winter. Personal space is a summer luxury. When night comes, sleeping clothes isn't awkward, it's sensible. There's a modern tendency to imagine medieval people as either stoic or miserable. The reality is more nuanced. You complain, sure, but you also adapt. You learn how to move without sweating, how to layer without constricting, how to spot when someone's getting too cold. This is community knowledge passed down without manuals. Children learn it early. If you're cold, someone notices. That matters. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were chronically underdressed by modern standards or simply adapted to cold in ways we no longer can. Cold tolerance is partly physiological, partly cultural. You don't expect constant warmth, so you don't panic when it's absent. You accept a baseline of discomfort that modern you would absolutely complain about on social media. There's also the ritual of mending. Winter evenings are for repairs. You sit by the fire, needle in hand, patching holes before they become drafts. A small tear is a future problem if ignored. Clothes aren't disposable. Every stitch is an investment in warmth. You feel a quiet satisfaction when a patch holds, when a seam stops letting in cold air. Occasionally, you inherit clothing from someone who's died. It's practical, not morbid. Wool doesn't care about sentiment. It cares about keeping you warm. The garment carries history, yes, but also heat. You wear it gratefully. As you finish layering, you feel heavier, slower. Movement requires effort. That's fine. Winter isn't about speed. It's about endurance. You step outside briefly, the cold biting immediately, and you're grateful for every layer between you and the air. You're not warm, exactly, but you're warm enough. And in a medieval winter, that's a victory. You drift back toward the hearth, because everything eventually orbits the fire. It's the gravitational center of winter life, pulling bodies, thoughts, and routines inward. The flames crackle softly, and you feel that familiar push and pull. Get close for warmth, step back for air. Managing a medieval fire is less about comfort and more about balance. The hearth itself is simple, a shallow pit or stone-lined area, sometimes raised slightly, sometimes not. There's no fancy grate, no adjustable airflow control. You place logs carefully, smaller pieces first, then larger ones, building a fire that burns steady rather than fast. A mainstream historical fact: firewood consumption increases dramatically in winter, and managing fuel is one of the most critical survival tasks for peasants. Too much now means none later. Too little now means shivering through the night. Smoke curls upward, spreading across the ceiling before finding its way out through gaps in the roof or a simple smoke hole. Chimneys exist by the later medieval period, but they're far from universal, especially among poorer households. Your eyes sting a little. Your throat feels dry. Chronic coughing is common. Historians still argue whether long-term exposure significantly shortened lifespans or whether people adapted physiologically over time. Either way, you accept it as the price of not freezing. Here's a quirky tidbit: the smoke does have a benefit. It discourages insects and preserves the thatch and wooden beams, acting like a low-grade fumigation. So while you're coughing now, future you is slightly less likely to be eaten alive by bugs in summer. Small mercies. You sit on a low stool or bench, close enough to feel the heat on your shins. The warmth is uneven. One side of your body feels almost comfortable, the other is still cold. You rotate occasionally like a human rotisserie, not for fun, but for survival. This is not the glamorous part of history documentaries. The fire is rarely left unattended. If it goes out, relighting it costs time, effort, and precious tinder. Some households try to bank the fire overnight, covering embers with ash so they smolder until morning. When it works, it's brilliant. When it doesn't, you wake to cold ashes and regret. Fire-starting tools exist, flint and steel, but they're not effortless. You don't take flame for granted. A light joke drifts in. You develop a deep emotional relationship with this fire. You talk to it. You judge it. You feel personally betrayed when it sputters. Modern people name their cars. Medieval peasants silently glare at their hearth. The hearth is also where cooking happens, even in winter. Pots hang from hooks. Stews bubble slowly, thick with grains and whatever vegetables survived storage. Cooking adds heat, moisture, and smell to the room. Sometimes that's welcome, sometimes it's overwhelming, but warm food matters. Eating cold meals in winter is a bad idea. Your body needs calories, and warm calories feel more convincing. You notice how soot coats everything over time. The walls darken, the ceiling blackens. Your clothes smell permanently smoky. It's not considered dirty, it's normal. Cleanliness standards shift when survival is on the line. You wash when you can, but winter makes water cold and scarce. You prioritize warmth over freshness. No one's judging. Everyone smells the same. Firelight changes the mood of the room. Shadows dance. Faces soften. Conversations quiet. There's a natural pull towards storytelling here, but that comes later. For now, the fire is functional. It dries damp clothes hung nearby. It warms tools before use so they don't shock your hands. It's multitasking long before the term exists. There's always a risk. Fires can escape. Thatched roofs are flammable. Entire villages have burned in winter when flames got out of control. You're careful. You keep water nearby. You watch sparks. Historians still debate how common accidental house fires were among peasant communities, but records suggest people were acutely aware of the danger. Fear sharpens attention. At night, the fire becomes smaller. You don't keep a roaring blaze while sleeping. That's wasteful and risky. You huddle closer, share blankets, and rely on residual warmth. The room cools, but not completely. The thick walls and thatch do their quiet work, slowing the escape of heat. You listen to the sounds around you, the soft crack of embers, the wind outside, the breathing of others. The fire is both sound and silence. It fills the space without demanding attention. In a world without constant noise, this matters. There's something hypnotic about watching flames when you're tired and cold. Your thoughts slow, muscles loosen slightly. The fire doesn't solve everything, but it makes things manageable. It turns survival from an emergency into a routine. As you edge closer, feeling that gentle heat soak in, you understand why the hearth becomes a symbol in so many cultures. It's not just warmth, it's stability. It's the promise that, for tonight at least, you won't freeze in the dark. And you let that promise carry you a little further into the night. The next challenge is food, because warmth alone won't keep you alive. You shuffle over to the storage area, a corner of the room or a small attached shed, where winter supplies are stacked carefully. Grain sacks lean against the wall, wooden barrels hold salted meat or fish, and dried legumes sit in bundles. Every item has a story and a purpose. You handle them with care because each morsel represents survival over comfort. Winter changes the way food is prepared and consumed. Fresh vegetables are mostly gone, leaving you to rely on root crops like turnips, carrots, and parsnips stored in cool, dry spaces. Potatoes aren't introduced yet, that comes later. The mainstream historical fact is that storage techniques, cellars, pits, or simply layered straw, were crucial. Poor storage meant spoiled food, and spoilage in winter is unforgiving. You smell the slightly sweet earthiness of your root crops and consider them precious. Meat is usually salted or smoked. Fresh meat is rare, preserved through labor-intensive processes because killing an animal in winter for immediate consumption isn't always practical. Salt is a valuable commodity, sometimes traded, sometimes hoarded. You rub the edges of a smoked hunk, feeling its density, imagining the taste, knowing it will be rationed carefully. One bite too many now could leave you hungry tomorrow. Here's a quirky tidbit medieval peasants sometimes ate. Black bread, made from grains like rye, mixed with whatever else they could scavenge, sometimes even acorns. The taste is strong, the texture heavy, and it keeps for weeks. Historians still argue how much this bread supplemented the diet versus simply filling empty stomachs. Either way, it's survival food, hearty and unromantic. Legumes, beans, peas, lentils are essential. They provide protein and bulk without spoiling quickly. You simmer them slowly over the fire, sometimes with small bits of preserved meat. The smell fills the room, blending with smoke, straw, and wool. It's not gourmet, but it's satisfying, especially in a way that modern instant meals can't match. You stir, blow on the spoon, and watch the bubbles dance like tiny signals of life. Calorie intake is a subtle science. You don't overeat because food is scarce, but you eat enough to maintain energy. Burning calories to stay warm is a constant calculation. Historians still debate whether peasants ever truly faced starvation in average winters or whether chronic semi-hunger was the norm. Either way, meals are modest, deliberate, and structured around fuel rather than flavor. Ale and mead are common winter staples, not just for celebration, but because liquid calories are easier to store and consume safely. Water sources may freeze or harbor microbes. Weak ale provides hydration, nutrition, and a warming effect. Honeyed mead, though less frequent, is a treat. Modern you might raise an eyebrow at this breakfast beverage, but medieval you sips it gratefully. It's liquid warmth in a cup, and warmth is life. You notice the labor of food preparation itself. Drying, salting, smoking, all take time, attention, and fire. Every process is a strategy against spoilage, a defense against hunger. Cooking in winter is continuous, not just a meal. You rotate pots, check stews, skim off froth, and stir beans with diligence. This is survival as slow-motion art. Animals are also part of the equation. Chickens are brought inside at night, not just to prevent theft or predators, but to conserve their body heat. Eggs are collected and stored carefully, sometimes buried in straw. Even a small flock can provide calories and warmth. Larger livestock, like pigs or goats, may share shelter, but only partially because the smell can be overwhelming. You negotiate space constantly, understanding that proximity is both life-saving and smelly. Spices are rare, mostly imported, and reserved for special occasions. You season modestly, relying on salt, herbs from summer gardens, or wild greens. Preservation comes first, taste second. A little peppercorn can feel luxurious, a reminder of a wider world beyond frost and snow. Eating is communal. You share a pot, passing it around carefully, each person mindful of rationing. Silence often prevails while chewing. Conversation conserves energy and prevents unnecessary exposure to cold air. You learn patience, portion control, and the subtle art of stretching a meal to last longer than the clock predicts. There's a rhythm to it: fire, food, warmth, repeat. The small victories, like a pot not burning, a loaf lasting, or a stew thickening just right, become sources of quiet satisfaction. You understand that surviving winter isn't about one spectacular effort. It's about hundreds of careful choices, repeated day after day. And in this slow rhythm, you realize something comforting. Even in the coldest months, the small labor of food keeps you tethered to life. Each bite, each sip, each shared morsel is both necessity and reassurance. The winter doesn't feel as threatening when you are fed, even modestly, even simply. You finish your portion, lean back, and let the warmth from the fire and the food seep into your bones. You're still cold, still cautious, still alert, but you've done enough for now. Survival is incremental. Tonight, you have eaten. Tonight, that is victory. You reach for your mug, feeling the warmth of ale or mead in your hands. It's barely alcoholic, weak by modern standards, but in winter it's a lifeline. Liquid calories supplement what solid food cannot provide, offering both energy and comfort. You sip slowly, feeling the heat spread from your throat down to your chest. A mainstream historical fact: medieval ale was often safer to drink than water because fermentation killed many pathogens, making it not just a treat, but a survival strategy. The flavor is simple, malty, slightly sour. You've learned to appreciate it. Ale and mead serve more than hunger. They are morale boosters on long, dark nights. A communal drink is a subtle way to strengthen bonds, quiet anxiety, and celebrate minor victories, like a fire that refuses to die or a loaf of bread that lasted the week. Humor emerges easily. Hearing spilling your ale is tragic, almost apocalyptic in proportion. Because calories are valuable, you tip the mug carefully, eyes half-lidded in the firelight, wishing for just a little more warmth in the room and in your bones. You notice how medieval peasants rationed alcohol differently than we might today. Weak ale could be consumed at breakfast without consequence, sometimes replaced water entirely. Mead, stronger and sweeter, is a reward saved for special occasions or feasts. Historians still argue whether ale was primarily nutritional or recreational, but in winter, every sip serves multiple purposes. Hydration, energy, and a mild psychological boost are all bundled together in a single cup. There's a social element too. Drinking isn't solitary. Families and neighbors gather around the hearth, mugs in hand, passing warmth and conversation. You can feel the subtle heat radiating from shared bodies, the same way wool traps air, but amplified by human proximity. Shared warmth is literal and metaphorical. Ale lubricates conversation, eases tensions, and keeps spirits slightly higher than they might otherwise be. Curious fact: sometimes ale is flavored with herbs, juniper berries, or even bramble leaves to mask imperfections. Medieval brewing was a craft, but not standardized. One batch might be sweet, another bitter. Consistency is a luxury. Historians still debate how widespread these flavorings were among poorer peasants, but experimenting with taste shows that even in hardship, humans seek small pleasures. You swirl the liquid in your mug, noticing the aroma, imagining the people who experimented with that recipe generations ago. Mead, though rare, carries prestige. It's a sweet, fermented honey drink, potent enough to warn against overindulgence. You sip modestly. Alcohol warms blood, yes, but overconsumption in the cold is dangerous. Frostbite doesn't care about intoxication. Modern humor creeps in. The medieval version of hot toddy therapy comes with fewer instructions and more risk. You chuckle softly at the thought, alone, yet comforted by history's shared absurdities. Ale and mead also serve as storage solutions. Liquids ferment, preserving calories over months, while other foods might spoil. You rely on this clever trick to extend your survival odds. Small breweries or household batches were common, and every family had methods adapted to local resources. Honey, grains, and water. Basic ingredients, extraordinary results when managed carefully. You notice how drinking affects your hands. The warmth radiates slowly, fingers uncurling from cold stiffness. You don't need magic gloves. Heat can be internal. There's a subtle interplay between body, environment, and beverage that you've learned to exploit. Every sip is strategic. Historically, winter drinking sometimes doubled as medicine. Weak ale or warm mead was thought to prevent colds, ease digestion, and keep spirits elevated. The line between sustenance, medicine, and comfort is thin. Historians still debate whether these beliefs had any measurable effect. But perception matters. If you feel safer, you're more likely to survive. As the fire flickers and the ale warms your core, you feel a rhythm emerge. Food, clothing, fire, liquid sustenance. It's a repeating loop that defines winter life. Survival isn't heroic, it's habitual. It's knowing how to extract warmth from everything available, from wool, from walls, from embers, from shared bodies, and from liquid calories. You take one last sip, savoring the simplicity. There's satisfaction in small victories, acts, a hot drink, a stable fire, dry clothes. You're not comfortable in the modern sense. But in medieval winter terms, you are adequately, strategically, temporarily safe. And for tonight, that is enough. The animals stir softly in the corner, and you remember that warmth isn't only human. In winter, bringing livestock indoors isn't a luxury. It's strategy. Chickens, pigs, goats, each contributes body heat that can shift the temperature of a room by a few crucial degrees. You watch them move, rustling straw, and appreciate the quiet cooperation between species that winter demands, a mainstream historical factig. Medieval peasants routinely sheltered animals inside their homes or adjacent outbuildings, partly for warmth, partly to protect against predators and theft. Sharing space comes with smells, noise, and occasional accidents, but survival trumps comfort. You step closer to a small pen where pigs snuffle contentedly. They're warm and surprisingly steady. You notice how their breathing adds humidity to the room, softening dry winter air and making the chill slightly less biting. Livestock are effectively primitive radiators. Their presence is a constant reminder of winter's compromises: warmth versus smell, comfort versus necessity. You nudge a chicken gently, and it squawks, unimpressed with your gratitude. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some peasants even let smaller animals sleep on or near their beds, tucked in layers of straw or cloth. It's not romantic, it's tactical. Warm bodies help regulate nighttime temperatures, especially for children and the elderly. Historians still argue whether this was common or exceptional, but archaeological evidence suggests it happened in multiple regions. Imagine a half-awake child with a goat snuggled nearby. Warmth mingled with chaos. Horses and larger livestock stay in separate barns, if the household can afford one. Their heat is less practical for indoor use, but still valued. You consider the logistics: muck management, space allocation, and ventilation. Smells are secondary to survival, and every arrangement is a compromise. Winter forces a constant negotiation with your environment. Animals also serve as food reserves, though this is grim. Pigs and chickens are not just companions, they are edible insurance policies. Salted or smoked, they become essential calories when the frost lingers too long. You peek at the stock, knowing what might need to be sacrificed in the harshest months. Even the act of tending them becomes an intimate survival ritual: cleaning, feeding, moving bodies efficiently and extracting warmth from their presence without exhausting yourself. Noise is another factor. Animals are alive, breathing, scratching, sometimes panicking in the dark. You learn to interpret their sounds. A distressed pig might mean someone forgot to close the barn door. A clucking hen signals safety and routine. You adjust your movements accordingly, keeping everyone as comfortable as possible. Silence is valuable in winter. Every unnecessary stir costs energy and warmth. Shared warmth isn't always entirely pleasant. Straw dust, ammonia, and the faint tang of fur infiltrate your senses. You stop noticing after a while. The brain adapts. You focus on benefits, microclimate regulation, thermal mass, and minor comfort. Modern humor sneaks in. This is less country charm and more olfactory endurance test. Still, the trade-off is life itself. Animals also shape daily labor. Feeding them, clearing stalls, collecting eggs. These are essential tasks, not chores. Missing even one step risks frostbite for yourself or death for the animal. You pace your day around them, learning the rhythm of their bodies, breathing, and needs. Winter isn't just about managing your body, it's managing all life under your roof. Children learn these lessons early. You watch a small boy toss straw at a hen without startling it, carefully maintaining warmth for both. Survival knowledge passes quietly from one generation to the next, often without formal instruction. Observation and repetition are the curriculum. Historians still debate whether this experiential learning was universal or regionally specific, but its effectiveness is evident in the archaeological and literary record. There's a certain meditative quality in tending animals indoors during winter. You're focused, attentive, rhythmic. The chaos of the cold world outside is kept at bay by careful movement and shared presence. Each animal you warm contributes to the household survival in a very tangible way. By the time the sun is barely peeking through tiny windows, your house feels fuller, warmer, and slightly more alive. The mingling heat of fire, wool, and animals creates a microclimate that is the difference between shivering and functioning. In medieval winter, life is negotiated constantly, minute by minute, breath by breath. And as you settle near the pen for a brief rest, listening to the gentle snuffles and clucks, you realize warmth is communal. Bodies, human and animal alike, conspire silently to keep each other alive, night after night. Night deepens again, and it's time for sleep. But medieval sleeping arrangements aren't what you'd imagine today. You trudge to your designated spot, which may be a shared loft, a simple straw mattress on the floor, or a corner near the fire where warmth pools. Space is tight, privacy is rare, the mainstream historical factor. Peasants often slept shoulder to shoulder in the same room, layering bodies, blankets, and occasionally animals to conserve heat. The arrangement is practical, sometimes awkward but effective. You arrange yourself on the straw mattress, wincing slightly at its hardness. Straw is far from luxurious. It compresses unevenly, poking your back, your shoulders, and sometimes your elbows if you're unlucky. But it's insulative, cheap, and replaceable. Qualities medieval households prized over softness. You tuck layers of clothing beneath and around you, creating a buffer between your body and the cold floor. The bed smells faintly of hay, wool, smoke, and everything else that shares this room. Your nose stops noticing eventually as survival dulls some sensitivities. The act of sleeping itself is a ritual. You huddle, feet toward the center, head toward the wall, arms close. Sometimes bodies are rotated during the night to ensure even warmth distribution. Shared sleeping isn't just for humans. Animals tucked nearby radiate additional heat. It's intimate, yes, but necessary. Humor creeps in as you imagine explaining this to a modern roommate. Sorry, the goat has dibs on the warmest corner. Quirky tidbitting in some regions. People slept with 1 foot out of blankets intentionally, believing that it regulated body heat and prevented illness. Historians still argue whether this was practical, symbolic, or purely superstition. Either way, these small adjustments reflect a deep, intuitive understanding of managing cold in a resource-limited environment. You feel the rhythm of the household chew, the soft breathing of family members, the occasional snort or shuffle from animals, the distant howl of wind outside. These sounds become comforting over time, a reminder that you're not alone. In fact, communal sleeping was as much psychological as practical. A single body isolated in a freezing room would be far more vulnerable to cold and fear alike. Bedding is sparse. Thick blankets are rare, so layers of wool, mud, additional clothing, and straw are your defense. You learn the fine art of positioning, how to hug a blanket just right, how to nestle against another person for warmth without suffocating them, how to maximize your heat while minimizing drafts. This is survival choreography, performed nightly without applause. The fire provides residual warmth, but it rarely survives the night in full blaze. Instead, you rely on heat stored in walls, floors, and human bodies. Nighttime temperatures are harsh, but you've adapted. Your movements are slow, deliberate, conserving energy. Any unnecessary motion risks cooling off and waking others. Historians still debate how long medieval households could comfortably maintain a warm sleeping environment, but evidence suggests most survived on shared warmth rather than fully heated rooms. There's a meditative aspect to this shared space. Lying close, you notice the rise and fall of breaths, the warmth of wool and fur, the rhythmic shuffle of animals adjusting. Your mind drifts gently, tracing the contours of the room in the firelight that barely reaches the loft. Darkness itself becomes manageable, softened by proximity and presence. Sleep comes unevenly. Cold wakes you periodically, forcing you to adjust, wiggle, or burrow deeper. It's not continuous, but it is sufficient. Dreams are thin, fragmented, colored by frost, fire, and the muffled sounds of life. Even rest is tempered by survival. You never forget the cold entirely. Humor surfaces quietly. If you're lucky, the only frostbite you suffer tonight is from your toes poking out. As hours pass, the room becomes a shared cocoon. Breath, warmth, and soft movement sustain life in a subtle ballet. You learn to measure comfort in degrees and layers rather than luxury. Each adjustment is minor, but each is crucial. You sleep, knowing you are both vulnerable and protected, held aloft by centuries of communal wisdom. And somewhere between wakefulness and dreams, you realize that winter nights, however harsh, are never entirely solitary. You shift slightly, mindful of the straw beneath you and the companions around you, both human and animal. Nights in a medieval peasant household are long, and the straw mattress comes with its own set of challenges. Fleas, lice, and other tiny intruders are a constant presence. You can't eradicate them, so negotiation becomes key. Tolerate their bites or move too much and lose precious heat. A mainstream historical fact: medieval bedding often harbored insects, but people adapted with periodic cleaning, layering straw, and shaking out sheets when possible. It's survival with small, itchy compromises. The mattress is layered strategically. Straw acts as insulation, separating you from the cold earth. Extra clothing doubles as padding. You shift to find a comfortable alignment, and one that balances warmth and the ability to breathe out, inhaling a cloud of dust. Humor sneaks in. This is basically sleeping on a crunchy, slightly scratchy sponge, but it works. Over time, your body adjusts. You start to prefer the crunch. It signals stability, not softness, which is overrated anyway. Blankets are often coarse wool, heavy and slightly pungent. They're reused year after year, patched with scraps of fabric. Modern softness standards would be horrified, but medieval practicality reigns. Each layer is calculated to trap air and hold warmth. Historians still argue whether medieval bedding evolved more from necessity or from attempts at comfort, but either way, layering was key. You can feel the trapped heat slowly spreading, coaxing your muscles to relax. Animals are tucked in nearby. Chickens may cluck softly in a corner. Pigs snuffle against the walls, and goats, if you're lucky, are curled in a small heap. Their warmth radiates outward, contributing to the household microclimate. You're careful not to push them too far. Overcrowding can stress both humans and animals, diminishing comfort. This is coexistence subtle, negotiated essential. You may even use the occasional animal movement as a gentle reminder to readjust your own position without fully waking up. Children's presence complicates and enriches the bedding arrangement. They are agile, small, and instinctively nestle close to warmer bodies. Their laughter, muffled by blankets, may surface briefly before being swallowed by the darkness. You recognize this as an educational moment. Kids learn survival instinctively, mimicking older siblings or parents. Even the simple act of curling into a warm corner is a lesson in thermal strategy. Historians still debate how early these survival skills were formally taught versus learned through experience, but their effectiveness is evident. Children often emerge resilient despite harsh winters. There's a rhythm to nighttime life. Movement is measured, noise minimized. Shuffling or turning is done slowly, conserving energy while preventing disruption. A misplaced elbow could wake someone, costing warmth, patience, and social harmony. You become hyper-aware of spatial dynamics: who sleeps where, how bodies align, how blankets overlap. Humor creeps back in. It's like a tactical board game, except the stakes are frostbite and comfort rather than checkmates. You notice your breath condensing in the cold air, forming tiny clouds that drift upward. Wool traps some of it, but the room remains humid and smoky. Respiratory irritation is a quiet companion. You cough softly, wary of disturbing the sleeping group. Scholars still debate how chronic smoke exposure and winter dampness affected respiratory health in peasants. Anecdotal evidence suggests adaptation occurred, though discomfort remained constant. The night stretches long. You oscillate between dozing and waking, adjusting layers, listening to creaks, sniffing the air, sensing the subtle heat of the fire fading. Each micro-adjustment keeps you alive and reasonably comfortable. Small victories. A warm patch of floor, a settled animal, a child breathing quietly, offer reassurance. Winter is relentless, but it is manageable in these measured increments. Quirky practices emerge in this context. Some households would place additional straw under the edges of blankets to block cold drafts, or tuck in small bundles of herbs thought to repel pests. Belief and practicality blend seamlessly here. You experiment subtly, learning what works, discovering that small rituals carry as much weight as tangible warmth. Historians still debate whether such rituals had measurable impact or were primarily psychological. Either way, they persist. Finally, as hours pass and the cold outside bites less sharply through thick walls and layered blankets, you allow yourself to relax. Your body, shared space, fire, and animals combine to create a fragile but effective microclimate. Sleep becomes deeper, the mind quieter. The external winter looms, but inside, life continues, rhythmically, predictably, slowly. And somewhere beneath the scratchy straw, layered wool, and the occasional animal shuffle, you drift into a dreamlike state, cradled by communal warmth and the quiet knowledge that night, however long and cold, can be survived. The mornings arrive slowly in winter, marked less by sunlight and more by subtle changes in light and temperature. You stir on the straw mattress, joints stiff from lying still, muscles aching from yesterday's labors and last night's shared warmth. The room is dim, shadows stretching from the small windows, filtered through cloth or animal bladder panes. Daylight is precious, short, and barely penetrating the thick walls of your home, a mainstream historical factic. The winter solstice could mean as little as 7 or 8 hours of usable daylight in northern European villages, making time a critical resource for work and survival. You rise carefully, aware that every movement disturbs warmth. The first task is always practical, tending the fire. Ember preservation is an art form. A few logs are added strategically to coax a steady flame without wasting fuel. Smoke drifts upward slowly, irritating your throat but reminding you that life continues. Historians still argue whether medieval households had systematic methods for fire maintenance or relied purely on experience and intuition, but either way, skillful management was essential. You fan embers gently, feeling the heat return to your fingers and forearms. Breakfast is modest. Leftover porridge, a piece of black bread, or perhaps a small portion of dried meat. Ale or weak beer accompanies it. Every bite is calculating, enough to fuel the body but not so much that it runs out before the next meal. Food is rationed carefully. Overindulgence in winter is unwise. A quirky tidbit: some peasants added ashes or ground herbs to stale bread to mask bitterness or add nutritional value. It might sound strange today, but survival encourages creativity in flavor and substance alike. Children stir as the house warms. They bundle up, dragging straw and blankets around themselves, learning by imitation how to conserve heat. You watch them, recognizing the unspoken lessons embedded in every motion: how to layer, how to share warmth, how to prioritize limited resources. This is experiential education passed down naturally. Scholars still debate whether these survival skills were consciously taught or simply absorbed, but either way, children adapted quickly. Outside, the ground is frozen solid. Snow may blanket the fields, or it may be hard packed and icy. Tasks that were trivial in warmer months now require careful planning. You notice frost clinging to fence posts, icicles hanging like jagged ornaments from roofs, and frozen water in troughs. Every chore is complicated by cold. Every step outside calculated to minimize exposure. The cold isn't just discomfort, it's a tangible risk to survival. Water collection is tricky. Wells may partially freeze, streams are icy, and melting snow is time-consuming. The mainstream historical fact: peasants often had to break ice or collect water incrementally, sometimes carrying it from distant sources. Each bucket is precious. You carefully transport water for cooking, cleaning, and livestock, aware that a spill is more than inconvenient. It's a waste of a critical resource. Animal care continues early in the day. Chickens are fed grain, pigs are checked, goats nudged into dry straw. Their warmth dissipates quickly if neglected, so attention is constant. The quirky detail in some villages: small bundles of herbs were scattered among animals, straw bedding to deter pests or supposedly prevent sickness. Historians still debate whether this had practical benefits or was primarily ritualistic, but it shows the blend of observation and belief in winter survival strategies. As daylight slowly lengthens, you prepare for outdoor labor. Fields are frozen, but tasks remain: chopping wood, repairing fences, collecting firewood, and maintaining paths. Even the simplest actions, fetching logs, breaking ice, or clearing snow, require planning to avoid frostbite and conserve energy. Movement is deliberate, often in short intervals to avoid overexposure. Humor creeps in. You stumble occasionally on icy ground, swearing silently at the frost, a ritual as old as winter itself. Winter work is different from summer. It's slower, focused on maintenance and preparation rather than growth. Tools are sharpened, wood stacked carefully, and any necessary repairs made before the weather worsens. Historians still debate how much this slowed the overall agricultural calendar versus merely redistributed labor. You notice the rhythm: short days, long nights, and a constant negotiation with cold and light. By mid-morning, the fire has softened the room enough that you can remove a layer or two without immediate discomfort. Clothes, bedding, animals, and fire all combine to create a fragile equilibrium. Survival is incremental: each small step, each calculated task, each carefully rationed meal keeps the household functioning until the sun returns fully. And as you pause, glancing at frost-covered fields through the tiny window, you recognize the subtle beauty of this harsh world. The cold is relentless, yes, but it shapes daily life in ways both challenging and strangely instructive. Winter demands attention, cooperation, and respect, and in return it rewards persistence and careful observation with warmth that, while limited, is deeply earned. And livelihoods. You follow the rhythm of the church bells as they chime faintly through the crisp morning air, a reminder that winter days are structured not just by light, but by ritual. Even in the smallest village, the calendar matters. Hours are divided into work, rest, and worship, providing order when daylight is scarce. A mainstream historical fact: medieval peasants relied heavily on the ecclesiastical calendar, marking seasons with feast days, saints' days, and fasting periods, which dictated labor and leisure alike. These religious markers help you pace the day, offering moments of spiritual comfort amidst physical hardship. The bells signal more than devotion, they help regulate the flow of activity and livelihoods. You notice how the rhythm of prayer and labor intertwines. Morning prayers might be whispered before the hearth, a quiet acknowledgement that survival depends not just on skill but on luck, protection, or divine favor. Historians still argue how deeply medieval peasants internalized these rituals versus performing them out of habit or social expectation. But either way, the structure is reassuring. In a frozen world, predictability is a form of warmth. Inside the home, morning chores commence. You carry water, tend animals, and begin heating pots for the first meal. Each action is deliberate, conserving energy while maximizing output. You notice subtle details: condensation forming on the walls, the way straw muffles footsteps, the lingering aroma of yesterday's fire and yesterday's meal. Every sensory cue informs your movements, helps you anticipate needs, and keeps the household functioning efficiently. Quirky tidbitsy: some villages had beating the bounds rituals even in winter, walking property lines to maintain markers and scare off spirits. It's partly legal, partly superstitious. You imagine villagers trudging through snow, marking boundaries with sticks or stones while chanting prayers or singing, adding both physical activity and spiritual reassurance. Scholars still debate whether these rituals had measurable legal significance or were primarily cultural, but the rhythm of walking in the cold undoubtedly kept bodies warm and minds alert. Your breakfast is simple porridge thick with grains, sometimes flavored with dried fruit if luck allows, and weak ale or water. You sit near the fire, hands outstretched, inhaling the heat and aroma. Shared eating is part nourishment, part social glue. Even brief conversation matters, reinforcing bonds that are critical for survival in harsh months. Humor creeps in. Sometimes the youngest child tries to sneak more than their fair share, leading to whispered negotiations over crumbs. Survival requires diplomacy, even at the breakfast table. After eating, you prepare for whatever work winter demands. The frozen soil prevents planting, but maintenance tasks abound. Fences need repair, firewood must be chopped and stacked, and paths cleared of ice. You step outside cautiously, boots crunching on frozen ground, nose stinging from wind. Every journey is calculated, every slip potentially costly. A modern observer might cringe at this routine, but in a medieval winter, these tasks are mundane, necessary, and continuous. Animals remain a priority. Chickens are fed grain, pigs checked for warmth and health, and goats nudged into straw. Each creature contributes heat, food, and sometimes labor, so their care is a survival strategy, not just a chore. You observe their behavior, adjusting feeding and shelter as needed. Historians still debate how much winter animal husbandry influenced peasant mortality rates, but the connection is clear: warmth, nutrition, and safety are intertwined. Outside work is punctuated by brief returns to the fire. You warm your hands, sip water or weak ale, and prepare for the next shift. Movement alternates with rest to avoid overexposure. Frostbite is a constant risk, and you've learned to respect it. Every part of the day is carefully managed to balance labor, warmth, and survival. By midday, shadows remain long, and the cold is unrelenting. You glance at the heavens, noticing the sun's weak angle and imagining how much longer this rhythm will persist. Even in its harshness, winter shapes life into a structured, predictable pattern: wake, feed, tend, work, rest, repeat. It's not glamorous, but it works. And as you step back inside, letting the door block a gust of wind, you recognize the quiet genius of this cycle. Winter is relentless, yes, but it is met with ingenuity, discipline, and small, deliberate rituals that make survival possible. And in that structure, you find a strange, almost meditative comfort. Afternoon arrives slowly, the sun hanging low and weak over frozen fields. The daylight is fleeting, precious, and every minute outside demands calculation. You wrap your cloak tightly around you, wool layers rustling softly, and step into the crisp air. The ground crunches underfoot, icy and uneven, each step a negotiation with gravity and frost. A mainstream historical facting: medieval peasants spent winter afternoons performing maintenance tasks, chopping wood, repairing tools, and prepping fields for the spring thaw. Because survival depended on preparedness rather than immediate harvest. Winter labor isn't glamorous. It's strategy. The air bites at exposed skin, and you draw your hood over your head. Fingers tingle beneath thin gloves, reminding you that every small exposure is cumulative. Even movement generates warmth, but every pause steals it back. You notice how your body has adapted: careful pacing, shallow breaths at first, then deeper once muscles loosen. Cold is not just a sensation, it's a constant factor in decision-making. Historians still argue how physiological adaptation to repeated cold exposure affected medieval mortality, but anecdotal accounts suggest that experience created resilience over time. Your task is simply repair fences surrounding the small garden or pen. Broken stakes are common after storms or heavy snow, and failing fences invite animals to wander or predators to intrude. You pound stakes into frozen ground, the mallet biting into your hands despite wool gloves, listening to the rhythmic thunk echo across the village. It's repetitive, monotonous work, but effective. You feel satisfaction in small progress. Each repaired stake is a tangible success, a tiny victory over winter's chaos. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you rest momentarily against a fence post. Some peasants would carry small talismans or charms while working outdoors, believed to ward off frostbite or evil spirits. Historians still debate whether these practices were superstition, psychological comfort, or had any practical effect, but walking with a protective trinket in the cold certainly boosts morale. You adjust yours subtly, feeling a tiny sense of security amid the relentless frost. Your breath clouds in the air, visible with each exhale. You notice patterns forming: wind gusts through the village in channels, ice clinging to wooden beams, shadows stretching across the snow. The landscape itself is part of your awareness, dictating movement, placement of materials, and even how you carry tools. Survival is spatial, tactile, and constantly adaptive. Back inside, the fire has diminished slightly but remains alive. You peel off layers, letting residual warmth seep into your body. Chickens cluck softly, pigs shift in straw, and the house seems alive with subtle motion. Shared heat from animals and people together creates a microclimate, a fragile cocoon against winter's relentlessness. Humor creeps in. The goat is hogging your favorite spot, yet you negotiate silently, respecting the hierarchy of warmth. This is coexistence at its practical, absurd best. Cooking occupies the next stretch of time. You bring water to boil over the fire, adding grains or dried legumes. Steam rises, fogging the small windows, making the room feel slightly softer. Every bubble signals progress, every simmer adds warmth. Food is survival, yes, but preparing it is also psychological. It reinforces control over the environment, however small. Hunger is momentarily postponed, replaced by the tactile satisfaction of labor completed. Children wander nearby, wrapped in layers, occasionally helping stir pots or fetch small items. They learn the rhythms of winter chores as much from observation as participation. You notice how intuitive their timing is. When to move, when to stay still, how to manage warmth. Survival knowledge passes silently, layered into daily life. Historians still debate the degree of formal training versus experiential learning in peasant communities, but effectiveness is undeniable. Children emerge competent and adaptable. By late afternoon, shadows stretch long across the snow, and the weak sun starts to dip. You glance at your work, satisfied but aware that another cold night awaits. The balance between labor and rest, heat and exposure, is delicate. Winter doesn't reward heroics. It rewards careful, consistent management of resources, bodies, and energy. Every step, every layer, every sip of water or ale is deliberate. This is survival as art, if subtle and repetitive. And as you pause by the hearth again, feeling warmth seep into tired muscles, you realize that even in the harshest months, these patterns, small, deliberate, communal, create a rhythm that is both sustaining and quietly reassuring. The cold outside is unyielding, but inside life persists. Evening begins long before you're ready for it. The sun sinks low, casting long shadows that stretch across frozen fields and rooftops. You return indoors, legs stiff from chopping wood and tending animals, aware that winter nights are longer than summer ones and demand careful management of light, warmth, and energy. A mainstream historical facet, peasants relied heavily on short winter days for labor efficiency, scheduling chores around sunlight and firelight, knowing that mismanagement could mean both lost productivity and danger from frostbite or hypothermia. You pause at the door, shaking snow from boots, and notice the faint glow of embers in the hearth. The fire has settled into a steady, low warmth. Smoke curls slowly through the gaps in the roof, leaving a grey film on beams and ceilings. It stings your eyes, but you've learned to tolerate it. Historians still argue how much smoke inhalation contributed to long-term health issues versus acute discomfort, but everyone living in this environment adapts as best they can. Modern noses would revolt, but your own barely notices anymore. Dinner preparations are underway. You pull a small pot from the fire, adding grains, legumes, and any remaining preserved vegetables. Cooking in winter is a slow, deliberate process. Speed burns fuel and wastes heat. You stir carefully, blowing gently on the contents to avoid choking on smoke. Quirky tidbit. Some peasants added ash or finely ground charred bones to thicken soups or mask bitterness in food. It sounds strange today, but these subtle adjustments made life slightly more tolerable and slightly more nutritious. Scholars still debate how widespread such practices were, but the evidence suggests they were at least occasional experiments in culinary survival. Children and younger siblings cluster near the fire, sharing warmth and listening quietly. You notice how intuitive their positioning is. They instinctively nestle against warmer bodies and away from drafts. Lessons in survival are embedded in these nightly routines: how to layer clothing, share warmth, and conserve energy. Observation is as crucial as instruction, and you realize that informal education in winter life begins almost from birth. The firelight flickers, illuminating soot, darkened beams, and rough-hewn walls. Every surface tells a story: smoke stains, repairs, and patched daubs speak of repeated winters endured. Humor creeps in as you notice a soot-streaked wall where someone apparently attempted art. With ash, modern graffiti, medieval style. Even in harsh circumstances, humans find ways to leave marks, assert identity, or simply amuse themselves. You distribute the evening meal carefully, making sure everyone gets enough to sustain energy but not so much that supplies dwindle prematurely. Salted meat, dried legumes, and coarse bread form the core. Ale or weak beer accompanies it. Each bite is savored with awareness, knowing that overconsumption in winter can be costly. Hunger and rationing dictate mindfulness, and communal eating strengthens bonds. Historians still argue how consistently winter rations were adequate versus chronically insufficient, but you notice that careful distribution makes the household resilient. After eating, chores resume briefly. You tend animals, adjusting straw bedding and ensuring warmth for the night. Chickens roost, pigs nestle, goats settle. Each creature is part of the household thermal system, radiating heat and reducing the energy you must expend to stay warm. You adjust positions, monitor behavior, and sometimes negotiate space with the animals. Humor drifts backing, the goat refuses to move from the warmest spot, and you acquiesce, realizing that survival sometimes requires diplomacy even with barnyard residents. By the time all is done, the room is dim except for embers and firelight, and a hushed calm settles. Movement is minimal, conversation soft. Every action is calculated to conserve warmth and energy. Historians still debate how medieval peasants balanced social interaction with survival needs in tight quarters, but the rhythm you observe is clerg share space, conserve heat, maintain routine, survive. You sit near the hearth, arms stretched toward embers, feeling residual warmth seep slowly into tired muscles. Smoke, animal warmth, layered clothing, and the fire combine to create a fragile equilibrium. Survival is incremental, achieved through attention countless small details repeated day after day. Each ember, each shared body, each simmering pot contributes to a carefully maintained microclimate that allows life to continue despite winter's relentless challenges. And as darkness fully envelopes the village, you feel the comforting rhythm of work, warmth, and food. Winter is harsh, yet it is manageable, structured, and surprisingly intimate. A constant negotiation with the cold, with others, and with yourself. Tonight, as always, you endure. Night deepens, and the household settles into the rhythm that defines winter life. You notice how the fire's glow softens shadows, casting flickering light across walls streaked with soot and straw. The warmth is uneven, stronger near embers, weaker near drafts. A mainstream historical fact: many peasant homes had no chimney, relying on smoke holes or gaps in the roof, so managing smoke and heat simultaneously was a daily skill. You rotate positions slightly, maximizing what comfort you can extract without wasting energy or disturbing others. The sleeping arrangements are communal, not just for humans but animals too. Chickens cluck softly, pigs snuffle, and a goat occasionally shifts. You listen, learning to distinguish between normal movements and signs of discomfort. Historians still debate how widespread indoor animal sheltering truly was, but the thermal advantage is undeniable. Shared heat, human and animal, is a critical survival strategy, especially when external temperatures plunge. You pull layers tighter, adjusting wool and linen to cover any exposed skin. Frostbite is subtle and insidious, and you've learned that prevention requires constant attention. A quirky tidbit: some peasants tucked small bundles of dried herbs into their clothing or bedding, believing they could ward off illness or pests. Modern logic might dismiss it, but the herb's aromatic oils likely provided minor comfort, masking odors and perhaps even mildly repelling insects. Either way, ritual and practicality intertwine. The night stretches, punctuated by occasional coughs, creaks from the wooden structure, and the faint shuffle of animals settling. Every sound is noted, evaluated, and integrated into your awareness. Movement is minimal, conserving warmth is paramount. Sleep is lighter than you might expect, interrupted by the need to adjust, shift a layer, or stoke the fire subtly without awakening others. This vigilance is second nature after years of practice. A fire that flickers too low or embers that die too quickly can ruin the night. You maintain a delicate balance, enough fuel to keep warmth radiating, but not so much that it consumes scarce resources. Humor creeps in quietly as you mutter complaints at stubborn embers that refuse to cooperate. A timeless battle between human intention and elemental resistance. You realize that fire is both ally and taskmaster, comforting yet demanding constant attention. Children are nestled nearby, often curled against adults for warmth and livelihoods. They've learned the rhythms of winter through observation, how to layer clothing, share heat, and minimize energy expenditure. Their small movements are instinctual strategies for survival. Scholars still debate whether formal instruction occurred or if learning was purely experiential, but the results speak for themselves. Even the youngest can endure night temperatures that would challenge a modern adult. Breath condenses in the cold air, forming tiny clouds that mingle with the smoke from the hearth. The room is humid and slightly pungent with animals and wool, but you barely notice now. Your body has adapted, focusing on warmth retention rather than comfort or scent. Each layer, each shift, each careful breath is part of an unconscious calculus of survival. You reflect on the cycle of the day: waking, tending fire, preparing food, feeding animals, and now returning to the hearth for the night. Survival is incremental, made of small, repeated actions, Each micro-adjustment, how you shift, how you layer, how you share space, is a deliberate negotiation with cold, scarcity, and physical limitations. Humor surfaces as you imagine someone in modern life trying to sleep like this: minimal blankets, scratchy wool, animals snuffling nearby, embers glowing weakly, and constant vigilance. They would probably fail spectacularly. And yet, as you close your eyes, the microclimate you've built sustains you. Heat from bodies, wool, and fire merges with habit and experience, creating a fragile but enduring cocoon. Winter is relentless, yes, but tonight it is manageable. You drift somewhere between wakefulness and dreams, cocooned in warmth, routine, and quiet resilience. Dawn creeps slowly, pale and hesitant, barely brushing the frozen landscape outside. You stir again, muscles stiff, fingers numb despite layers, and you realize that night's sleep has been patchy, punctuated by rotations, adjustments, and occasional shuffles from animals. A mainstream historical fact: medieval peasants typically slept in shifts or with light disturbances, partly due to cold and partly because communal living required constant negotiation of space. You rise carefully, mindful of both warmth and noise, stepping into a room already alive with subtle motion. Your first action is always the fire. Ember management is ritualized, small twigs coaxed into flame, logs arranged for efficiency, smoke guided out of holes and gaps. You breathe in the faintly acrid scent, noting the soft warmth that spreads slowly to fingers and toes. Historians still argue whether smoke exposure contributed significantly to respiratory issues or if humans adapted over time, but you barely notice now. It is background like the tick of a clock, essential, persistent, and quietly shaping daily life. Breakfast is simple, thick porridge, sometimes with dried fruit or a smear of honey if available, and weak ale or water. Each bite is deliberate, fueling you for the day ahead without exhausting precious stores. Humor sneaks in as you watch a younger sibling attempt to sneak more than their fair share, and subtle negotiations ensue over crumbs. Food in winter is not just nutrition, it's diplomacy, strategy, and survival in equal measure. Outside, the cold bites sharply. You layer clothing carefully, adjusting woolen tunics, linen undergarments, and cloaks so that movement remains possible but heat is retained. The frost glints on fences and fields, icicles dangling like crystalline daggers from eaves. A quirky tidbit: some peasants would place straw or ashes around high traffic paths to improve traction or to minimize direct contact with freezing ground. Historians still debate how widely such microstrategies were practiced, but every tiny innovation contributes to endurance. Your morning chores focus on maintenance: chopping wood, repairing tools, and preparing firewood for the next night. Each action is repetitive, but every strike of the axe and every repaired fence post ensures both warmth and security. Work is calibrated, alternating labor with brief returns to the fire to avoid overexposure. Frostbite is ever present, subtle, and unforgiving, demanding constant attention to extremities and moisture. Animals are tended again, feeding and checking each creature. Chickens roost, pigs nestle, and goats find warmth in straw piles. Their heat is as critical as any garment, forming part of the household's microclimate. Shared warmth is a constant, subtle negotiation: move too close and someone loses comfort, too far, and the cold steals advantage. Humor drifts in: the goat claims the warmest spot, a recurring victory in the silent pecking order of survival. Work extends into early afternoon. The daylight is still fleeting, making every minute precious. You move efficiently, aware that wasted motion is wasted warmth. Historians still debate how medieval peasants structured labor in winter versus summer, but the evidence suggests meticulous planning: chores, animal care, and preparation for food all timed around light and energy. Modern efficiency experts would be proud or horrified at the absence of ergonomic tools. Lunch is modest, usually leftovers from breakfast or early dinner, supplemented with any preserved vegetables or grains. You notice how even the simplest meals provide more than calories. They reinforce routine, stability, and a sense of control over the environment. In a season dominated by scarcity, ritual and consistency become as nourishing as food itself. By mid-afternoon, the fire warms the room more fully. You pause to rest briefly, watching embers glow and listening to subtle animal movements. The house feels alive, a symphony of breaths, rustling straw and crackling wood. Survival isn't heroic. It's habitual, incremental, and deeply reliant on observation, timing, and cooperation. Humor surfaces quietly. The goat has relocated, forcing a small reorganization of human bodies. Adaptation, you think, is the essence of winter life. And as shadows stretch across walls and the weak sun angles lower, you realize the day is a delicate balance of work, warmth, and vigilance. Every action, shopping, layering, adjusting, is a small victory against the cold. And tonight, as always, survival will depend on repeating these careful routines with patience and precision. Late afternoon stretches on, and the weak winter sun dips even lower, painting the frozen fields with pale orange and silver. You return indoors, shivering slightly from the cold walk back, aware that the next challenge is maintaining warmth as daylight fades. The mainstream historical fact without modern insulation. Medieval homes relied on thick walls, layered clothing, and proximity to the hearth or animals to survive long winter evenings. Every microclimate you create is crucial, and you step inside like a strategist entering a command center, assessing fire, people, and space. The hearth glows softly, embers alive but dwindling. You add small logs carefully, coaxing steady heat without over-consuming fuel. Smoke curls upward in lazy spirals, stinging eyes and throat yet providing both warmth and a primitive form of air purification. Historians still argue whether prolonged smoke exposure shortened lifespans or whether adaptation allowed the respiratory system to cope. But you barely notice now, it's part of life. Background rhythm. Dinner preparations begin. A pot is set over the fire, filled with grains, legumes, and whatever preserved vegetables are left. You stir methodically, feeling the warmth radiate into your arms. Quirky tidbit: some peasants added tiny amounts of ashes or powdered bones to soups or porridge, a pragmatic and slightly alarming trick to thicken meals or add minerals. Scholars still debate how widespread these practices were, but the logic is clear. Resource scarcity encourages creative, sometimes unusual culinary strategies. Children gather nearby, quiet and attentive, learning the rhythms of winter life without being explicitly instructed. They mimic layering, heat conservation, and careful movement around the hearth and sleeping animals. This is hands-on education, subtle and relentless. Historians still debate how much of survival knowledge was formal versus experiential, but observation clearly counts as a full curriculum. You glance at a small boy carefully moving a chicken, impressed by instinctive caution and efficiency. The firelight illuminates soot-darkened walls, the straw mattress tucked in a corner, and layers of wool and linen hanging to dry. Humor creeps in. A particularly bold chicken seems to survey the room like a tiny, judgmental overseer, squawking when movement isn't up to its standards. Shared life with humans and animals blurs boundaries, but it also creates a palpable, cooperative microclimate. Warmth isn't just temperature. It's strategy, shared presence, and subtle negotiation. After food is ready, everyone eats in quiet efficiency. Salted meat, black bread, and simmered legumes sustain bodies for the long night ahead. Ale or weak beer accompanies the meal, providing both calories and mild warmth. Conversation is minimal, conserving energy and minimizing exposure. Humor drifts back as you watch a sibling surreptitiously dip a piece of bread into the pot twice, whispering excuses. Winter teaches patience and diplomacy, often simultaneously. Chores continue in small bursts. Animals are fed and adjusted in their straw bedding, ensuring that shared heat remains steady overnight. Each creature is not just food or companion, but a living radiator. You negotiate their positions carefully. The pigs snuffle contentedly, the goat huffs softly, and the chickens cluck their approval or disapproval. Humor, patience, and observation are all survival skills in miniature. The late afternoon slowly transitions into dusk. Shadows deepen, and the room's warmth becomes the only barrier between life and the icy night outside. You notice subtle shifts, embers glowing brighter with small adjustments, air moving differently as walls cool, animals shifting their positions. Every detail matters. Historians still debate how medieval peasants measured success in winter. By warmth, food, survival, or some combination, but you recognize that each careful observation, adjustment, and rotation is a personal metric of endurance. As night encroaches, you feel a gentle satisfaction. The fire is steady, animals settled, food consumed, and the household microclimate stable. Survival isn't dramatic. It's incremental, repetitive, and deeply dependent on shared effort. Humor and small rituals persist, lightening the endless calculation of warmth, food, and vigilance. And as embers glow faintly, you sense the familiar rhythm of winter life carrying you into the night, cautious, deliberate, communal, and, despite the cold, surprisingly comforting. Night deepens fully, and the household settles into its long winter rhythm. The fire crackles softly, embers glowing in quiet bursts, casting moving shadows on the walls streaked with soot and straw. You huddle in layers of wool and linen, feeling the warmth radiate slowly into stiff muscles. A mainstream historical fact: medieval homes were poorly insulated, and even a well-maintained hearth could only heat a small area effectively, making shared body heat critical. Survival depends on proximity, routine, and careful management of every ember, every blanket, every animal. Animals are tucked in close, contributing subtle warmth. Chickens cluck softly, pigs shift in straw, and goats snuffle, each radiating small but vital heat. Historians still debate how common indoor livestock really were, but archaeological evidence suggests this strategy was widespread in northern climates. You adjust your position, negotiating space with your fellow humans and animals alike, realizing that survival is as much about diplomacy as heat retention. You notice small rituals of winter: bundles of herbs tucked into bedding, ashes sprinkled underfoot, and careful arrangement: straw for insulation. Quirky tidbit: some peasants believed that a circle of straw around the hearth could ward off evil spirits or protect the household from sickness. Modern logic may roll its eyes, but in practice, these rituals helped structure behavior and attention, keeping people alert to their environment. Historians still debate whether these practices had measurable effects, but their psychological comfort was real. Sleep is uneven and shallow. You shift to avoid cold spots, steer embers, and occasionally adjust animals' positions. The rhythm of breathing around you, the snuffle of a pig, the cluck of a chicken, the rise and fall of siblings' chests, forms a lullaby of survival. Movement is minimal, deliberate, and calibrated for heat conservation. You learn to recognize when a tiny noise signals danger versus normal activity, a subtle skill honed over years of winter nights. Food stores are carefully rationed. Leftovers from earlier meals are tucked away, ready for the next day. Even small scraps are precious. A bite too much tonight may mean hunger tomorrow. Humor surfaces quietly as you imagine explaining this to someone used to modern abundance. Yes, the last piece of bread is a tactical resource. You mutter under your breath. Survival requires both discipline and a slightly absurd sense of humor. Smoke from the hearth rises slowly, filling the room with a haze that stings eyes, but carries faintly sweet aromas from simmering herbs or charred wood. Modern noses might gag, but your senses have adapted. The smell signals warmth, routine, and security. You notice details others might miss: the angle of smoke, the faint drift of cold air through cracks, the subtle redistribution of heat as bodies shift. Observation itself becomes a survival tool. Children, curled near adults or wrapped in layers, absorb these rhythms quietly. They learn to read the environment, how to layer clothing, how to position themselves for warmth, and when to remain still. Survival knowledge is passed experientially, encoded in movement and behavior rather than formal instruction. Historians still debate how conscious this transmission of knowledge was, but its effectiveness is clear. Children emerge adaptable and resourceful, accustomed to life dictated by cold, fire, and shared bodies. By midnight, the fire has burned down to embers, the animals are settled, and the household is a quiet, vibrating cocoon of warmth. You shift slightly, feeling residual heat, inhaling the faint scents of straw, wool, and smoke, and recognize the subtle genius of winter survival: incremental, communal, ritualized. Humor, observation, and careful planning all intertwine with warmth and nourishment to create resilience in a harsh world. And as you drift closer to sleep, cocooned in blankets and animal warmth, you realize that the night, though long and cold, has been survived yet again. You are part of a living rhythm, a cycle of heat, work, and vigilance repeated endlessly through centuries of winter. Hours pass slowly, and the quiet rhythm of the household persists. You shift slightly, adjusting wool layers against a draft, careful not to disturb the delicate warmth of nearby bodies. A mainstream historical fact tag: medieval peasants often slept in communal spaces not only for heat but for protection, social cohesion, and shared vigilance. An isolated individual was far more vulnerable to cold or accidents. You notice how every tiny movement is deliberate, calculated, a part of an ongoing negotiation between comfort, survival, and coexistence. The animals remain your constant, low-level companions. Chickens rustle in their straw, pigs shift and sigh, goats adjust positions with a soft grunt. Their body heat diffuses slowly through the room, and you consciously calculate microclimates, leanings, slightly toward the warmth while avoiding overcompression. Historians still argue how typical these indoor arrangements were across Europe, but northern climates clearly favored such practices. Humor creeps in: quietling the goat seems to claim dominion over the fire-adjacent corner, as if the pecking order extends beyond species. You acquiesce, recognizing the wisdom in letting it win small victories. The air smells faintly of smoke, straw, and wool, a pungent cocktail that modern noses might reject, but yours barely notices anymore. Quirky tidbit: some households sprinkled powdered herbs among straw bedding to repel pests, creating faintly aromatic microclimates. Scholars still debate the practical efficacy of these herbs, but their psychological value is undeniable. Believing in a protective ritual may boost alertness, morale, or just the sense that one is actively safeguarding life. Sleep is patchy. You alternate between dozing and micro-adjustments, rotating a limb, shifting closer to another body, or tugging a blanket over exposed skin. Every subtle motion conserves heat, and you learn to distinguish between discomfort, danger, and normal movement. Observation becomes instinctive, and livelihoods. You can tell the difference between a chicken cluck that signals hunger versus one that signals settling in for warmth. The night becomes a lesson in attention to detail, repeated hourly. You remember the days labored chopping wood, tending animals, repairing fences, and preparing meals. Each action now threads into the night, part of the ongoing strategy to maintain life in cold months. Survival is incremental, layered, habitual. Humor surfaces briefly as you imagine a modern houseguest navigating this environment: the straw mattress, the smoky air, the animals snuggling too close. They'd likely retreat immediately, but in your rhythm, it works and even feels strangely comforting. The fire dwindles further. You blow gently on embers to coax warmth without consuming too much fuel. Tiny sparks illuminate soot, streaked walls, and straw bedding, reminding you of the fragility and importance of human ingenuity. Each ember is a life-sustaining microcosm, and you marvel at how survival depends on attentiveness to such small details. Children breathe softly near adults, learning instinctively how to navigate winter nights. They shift only as necessary, conserving warmth, observing adult behavior. This is silent education: layering, micro-movement, animal interaction, and fire management all become embedded in memory and habit. Historians still debate the age at which these skills were fully internalized, but evidence suggests children were remarkably capable in managing cold. By the depth of night, the household has settled into a fragile equilibrium. Heat radiates from fire, bodies, and animals. Smoke lingers but does not overwhelm. Shadows dance quietly on walls, and the room hums with a soft symphony of survival. You feel a measured comfort, not indulgent, but earned. Every action, every micro-adjustment, every shift, every ember coaxed, is a small victory over winter's relentlessness. And as you drift closer to sleep, you sense the subtle, communal pulse of the household, a living rhythm of warmth, vigilance, and quiet endurance that carries through the longest nights. Tonight, survival is seamless, almost meditative, a shared accomplishment of humans and animals together. Morning arrives again, pale and fragile, barely lighting the frozen fields outside. You stir on the straw mattress, fingers stiff, muscles aching from yesterday's labor and last night's micro-adjustments to preserve warmth. A mainstream historical fact. Medieval peasants relied heavily on short winter days to schedule all necessary labor, often rising before dawn and working in dim light to maximize productivity. Every step is deliberate, measured, and part of a carefully maintained rhythm of survival. You push off the bedding and approach the hearth first. As always, embers have cooled but are not dead. A few twigs and smaller logs reignite a steady glow. Smoke curls upward lazily, stinging your eyes slightly, but the heat radiates immediately to your hands and chest. Historians still debate the long-term effects of chronic smoke exposure versus adaptive tolerance, but tonight your lungs have become accustomed, almost indifferent. Warmth is life, smoke is background, and you navigate both instinctively. Breakfast is prepared with attention to both ration and warmth. Porridge, perhaps with dried fruits or grains, is supplemented by ale or weak beer. You watch children around the hearth, their movements instinctive, wrapping layers tightly, nestling against adults or animals, and adjusting positions to conserve heat. Quirky tidbit: in some households, children would sleep with one foot exposed or near the hearth as an early method of regulating body temperature. A tactic historians still debate as practical versus ritualistic. Either way, it is effective, and the kids do it naturally. Outside, frost glitters on fences and rooftops. The landscape is silent, except for distant animal calls or the scrape of a neighbor's shovel. Every step you take across the frozen ground is calculated to preserve energy and warmth. You notice wind channels, icy patches, and even the subtle differences in snow texture. An unconscious assessment of terrain, temperature, and safety. Humor surfaces quietly. Modern snow boots would be a luxury, but you've learned to adapt with straw and wool. Animals are tended immediately. Chickens are fed, pigs inspected, and goats nudged into the warmest straw piles. Their warmth is essential. Even the smallest animal contributes to the household microclimate. You monitor subtle signs: a chicken's ruffled feathers, a pig's restless shuffle, a goat's huff. These details communicate comfort, distress, or fatigue. Historians still debate how systematic such monitoring was, but it is clearly embedded in routine. Tasks for the day include maintenance, chopping firewood, repairing fences, and preparing for meals. Each action is repetitive but critical. You alternate bursts of labor with brief returns to the fire, carefully balancing exertion against exposure. Frostbite is a constant threat, subtle and cumulative, requiring vigilance and strategic movement. Humor creeps in again. A particularly slippery patch of ice sends you sliding slightly, and you mutter at the winter's stubbornness. Small mishaps are part of survival, but managed skillfully, they are harmless. Mid-morning passes, and the daylight remains weak. You pause by the fire, letting residual warmth seep into your body while observing the household. Children mimic adults instinctively, animals adjust naturally, and small rituals, stirring the pot, coaxing the fire, rearranging straw bedding, maintain continuity and morale. Historians still argue how ritual, superstition, and practical adaptation blended in peasant life, but the effect is clear: life proceeds efficiently, predictably, and resiliently. By noon, the day has gained momentum, yet winter's grip remains firm. Food stores, firewood, clothing, and careful management of animals and people continue to dictate action. Every motion is deliberate, every micro-adjustment has a purpose. Survival is not glamorous, it is methodical, communal, and deeply reliant on observation, timing, and experience. Humor, patience, and creativity weave through the mundane, easing the monotony and softening the harshness of frost and shadow. And as the weak sun begins its slow descent toward horizon, you sense the familiar rhythm of winter life guiding you forward. Wake, tend, feed, adjust, repeat. Each day is a microcosm of survival, a dance with cold, fire, and community. And today, as always, you endure, measured, careful, and quietly triumphant. The afternoon stretches on, and the sun hangs low, casting long, pale shadows across snow-crusted roofs and frozen fields. You step outside briefly, boots crunching on ice, checking fences, paths, and water sources. A mainstream historical fact. Peasants relied heavily on routine inspections and maintenance to prevent minor winter problems from becoming life-threatening. Frozen wells, broken fences, or damp straw could all quickly escalate into crises. Every movement is deliberate, every glance calculated. Winter life is a series of tiny interventions, repeated and refined over years. The wind bites sharply, nudging you to move efficiently and avoid prolonged exposure. You carry chopped wood or buckets of water, feeling the frost sting exposed skin through layered gloves and mittens. Humor drifts quietly, slipping once or twice on ice seems inevitable, and you mutter under your breath, as if arguing with winter itself. Small mishaps are part of the rhythm, expected, absorbed, and quickly corrected. Animals are attended next. Chickens cluck softly, pecking grain in straw-laden corners. Pigs snuffle, burrowing slightly to conserve heat. Goats nudge each other into warmer spots. Their subtle movements form a microcosm of life that you monitor instinctively. Historians still debate how widespread indoor animal husbandry truly was in different European regions, but evidence suggests that shared indoors with livestock was common in colder climates. Their warmth, presence, and behavior are critical cues in maintaining household survival. Inside, you tend the fire again. Embers glow faintly, coaxed into higher flame with careful placement of twigs and small logs. Smoke rises slowly, filling the room with that familiar pungent warmth. Quirky tidbit. Some households use damp straw or aromatic herbs in the fire to subtly alter scent, mask odors, or even repel pests. Historians still debate whether such practices had measurable effects or were primarily ritualistic, but in practice, they provide small psychological and practical benefits, which are just as important as physical heat. Meals are simple, but routine is everything. Thick porridge, black bread, preserved vegetables, and occasional salted meat form the staples. You serve carefully, ensuring fair distribution, and watch children instinctively conserve heat by huddling near the fire and adults. Humor surfaces, a chicken sneaks a nibble from the pot's edge, and you shake your head, aware that even minor disturbances become part of daily life. Meals in winter are about nourishment, yes, but also about maintaining order, morale, and microclimate management. As shadows lengthen, minor repairs are made, a fence post realigned, a patch of straw replaced, a firewood stack rearranged. Each task is small, but the cumulative effect ensures the household remains functional and resilient. Frost and ice demand constant attention. Even a moment's negligence can have cascading effects. Historians still debate how meticulous peasants were versus improvising, but the evidence of well-maintained winter routines is clear. By late afternoon, the room glows softly from the hearth. Animals are settled, and everyone rests briefly. You allow yourself a moment to observe the rise and fall of smoke, the gentle snuffles of pigs, the careful movements of children, the flicker of embers. Each detail is a signal, a lesson, and a reassurance. Survival is incremental, reinforced by repeated observation, small adjustments, and quiet cooperation. And as daylight fades into dusk, you feel the familiar pulse of winter life, labor, warmth, vigilance, and shared presence. Each micro adjustment, each ember-coaxed careful rotation of bodies or animals, becomes part of the intricate web of endurance. Winter is harsh, unrelenting, but tonight, like every day, the household persists through methodical, deliberate, and communal effort. Dusk settles fully, and the household begins its evening rhythm. The weak winter sun has disappeared behind frozen rooftops, leaving only pale reflections on snow and ice outside. You move carefully around the room, mindful of precious heat, adjusting layers and checking the position of animals. A mainstream historical fact: medieval peasants structured their evenings to maximize retained warmth, often consolidating human and animal bodies near the hearth to conserve heat while performing last-minute chores. Every micro-adjustment counts. Each ember coaxed, blanket shifted, and animal nudged contributes to survival. The fire glows faintly, embers pulsating softly like a heartbeat. You add a few small logs, careful not to waste scarce resources. Smoke drifts lazily upward, lingering in corners, irritating the eyes but providing subtle warmth and comfort. Historians still debate whether chronic smoke exposure shortened lifespans significantly, but in winter, the immediate benefit of heat outweighs long-term risk. You inhale deeply, savoring the combination of warmth, soot, and straw, the smell of survival itself. Children cluster near adults, instinctively seeking warmth and learning survival routines without instruction. They shift slightly, adjusting clothing and curling closer to both human and animal companions. Quirky tidbit: some households kept small bundles of dried herbs tucked into children's clothing at night, believing it would prevent illness or repel pests. Scholars still debate whether this had measurable health benefits, but it provides both comfort and a sense of agency in a world dominated by cold and scarcity. The animals are settling in as well. Chickens cluck softly in their straw, pigs burrow, and goats huff, claiming prime spots. Their warmth diffuses slowly, creating pockets of microclimate that extend to humans. Humor surfaces as the goat subtly maneuvers closer to the coziest corner, and you pretend to negotiate, acknowledging its small victories. Shared space is a constant negotiation of warmth, comfort, and hierarchy. Evening chores continue briefly, topping off water for animals, replenishing straw bedding, and rearranging tools. Each task is repetitive but essential. You alternate movement with periods of stillness to avoid losing precious body heat, measuring effort against exposure. Historians still debate how systematic winter labor routines were versus improvisational, but observation suggests a combination of habit, learned experience, and necessity governed daily action. Dinner is simple, consumed quietly. Porridge, grains, and preserved vegetables dominate the menu, sometimes accompanied by salted meat. Portions are carefully rationed to sustain energy overnight. Humor drifts in. A small child attempts to hide a piece of bread, and you shake your head knowingly. Food is not only nourishment, it's also a tactical resource in winter survival, a delicate balance between satisfying hunger and conserving stores. By nightfall, the room is dim except for embers and faint lantern or candle light. The household hums with life, soft breathing, shifting bodies, and occasional animal sounds. Every sound is noted unconsciously, signaling comfort, disturbance, or danger. Sleep is light but rhythmic, punctuated by micro-adjustments, rotations, and gentle coaxing of blankets or animal companions. Historians still debate how deep and restorative medieval sleep truly was under these conditions, but the repeated patterns of warmth and vigilance suggest it was sufficient. And as the night settles fully, you recognize the delicate choreography of survival: coordinated movements, careful layering, shared warmth, and constant attention to the smallest details. Winter life is relentless, but tonight, like every night, it is endured successfully, quietly, and almost meditatively. The night deepens, and the household descends into its familiar rhythm of quiet vigilance. You lie partially upright, adjusting wool layers against the creeping cold, mindful of the subtle drafts that snake through gaps in the walls. A mainstream historical fact: medieval peasants often relied on microclimates created by the combination of human bodies, animals, straw bedding, and residual fire heat, since even a well-stoked hearth could only warm a limited area. Survival is a constant balance of attention, observation, and strategic positioning. Animals breathe softly around you, chickens rustle, pigs snuffle, and goats shift slightly in the straw, radiating tiny pockets of warmth. Historians still debate the prevalence of indoor livestock across regions, but the practical benefit in northern climates is clear. Shared heat reduces the strain on clothing and bedding, subtly improving comfort and energy conservation. Humor creeps in quietly. The goat again asserts dominance over a preferred corner, nudging you slightly, and you mutter a resigned acknowledgement, another micro-negotiation in the art of winter survival. The room smells faintly of smoke, straw, and wool, a pungent, earthy combination that your senses have adapted to over years of winter. Quirky tidbits. Some households tucked aromatic herbs like rosemary or thyme into straw bedding to repel lice and fleas, blending superstition and practicality. Scholars still debate the effectiveness of these herbal rituals, but they undoubtedly provided psychological comfort, helping people feel they were actively protecting themselves even in an environment dominated by cold and scarcity. Sleep is uneven, punctuated by micro-adjustments. Shifting limbs, repositioning blankets, and subtly nudging animals to maximize heat distribution. You've learned to distinguish between ordinary movements and signals of discomfort or danger, a skill honed over countless nights. Observing and interpreting these small cues is as crucial as tending the fire or managing food stores. Survival depends on noticing what others, or even animals, cannot explicitly communicate. You reflect on the day's incremental accomplishments: wood chopped, fences repaired, meals prepared, and animals tended. Each task threads into the night's rhythm, reinforcing a cycle of cautious activity and shared warmth. Humor surfaced, imagining a modern observer trying to sleep amid snuffling pigs and clucking chickens on a scratchy straw mattress might elicit laughter. But here, it is normal, even comforting. The absurdities of survival often double as small joys, subtle distractions from the relentless cold. The fire has dwindled, embers glowing faintly. You coax heat back with tiny adjustments, blowing gently to revive life without wasting fuel. The soft glow illuminates walls scarred with soot, straw bedding, and patched cloth, each marking past winters endured. Every ember, every rotation, every shared breath is part of a carefully choreographed strategy of endurance. Historians still debate whether these routines were conscious methods or simply instinctual, but their effectiveness is undeniable. By the depth of night, the household has settled into fragile equilibrium. Heat, smoke, bodies, and blankets create pockets of comfort against the relentless frost outside. Every micro-movement, ember-stoked, and whispered adjustment contributes to survival. The rhythm is quiet, communal, and continuous, a living testament to human adaptability in the harshest months. And as your eyelids finally begin to close, you feel the subtle pulse of shared life-egg vigilance, warmth, observation, and endurance all interwoven into a nightly meditation. Winter is long and unyielding, yet in this cocoon of bodies, fire, and habit, it is quietly, reliably survived. Dawn creeps into the household slowly, a pale wash of grey over snow and frost-laden rooftops. You stir on the straw mattress, stiff from a night of micro-adjustments, and instinctively check the fire first. A mainstream historical fact: medieval peasants relied heavily on hearth embers to regulate temperature at night and provide a reliable starting point for morning warmth, often reviving embers before even fully waking. Every motion is deliberate, aimed at conserving heat and energy while preparing for another day in the relentless cold. You rise carefully, aware that moving too quickly can steal precious body warmth. Smoke from the hearth curls lazily, stinging slightly, but the warmth radiates gradually, coaxing stiff muscles back to life. Historians still debate how much long-term smoke exposure impacted health, but for now, it is merely background, a familiar companion in winter life. You adjust straw bedding and clothing, layering wool and line strategically to trap heat and shield against drafts. Humor creeps in as you notice the goat claiming the warmest corner again, a repeated victory in the subtle pecking order of survival. Breakfast is modest but calculating: thick porridge, sometimes enriched with dried fruit or a small dollop of honey, and a mug of weak ale or water. Children cluster instinctively near adults or animals, conserving warmth while observing the household routines. Quirky tidbit: some households tucked small bundles of herbs into clothing at night to prevent sickness or repel pests, a combination of superstition and practical observation. Scholars still debate the effectiveness of these practices, but they provide both a sense of control and minor physical benefits. Outside, frost glints on frozen fences, paths, and rooftops. You step carefully, boots crunching over ice and compacted snow. Every step is an assessment: energy expenditure, exposure to cold, and the physical state of the terrain. Even the simplest outdoor task, a short trip to the well or a check on livestock, requires attention to detail. Humor surfaces. Slipping slightly on ice elicits a quiet groan, a reminder that winter is relentless yet predictable, and that small missteps are part of the rhythm. Animals receive immediate attention. Chickens are fed, pigs inspected and repositioned in straw, and goats nudged into warmer spots. Their warmth radiates slowly, complementing your layered clothing and the residual heat from the hearth. Historians still debate how systematically peasant households monitored livestock in winter versus improvising, but observation and adaptability are clearly embedded in routine. Chores continue incrementally: chopping wood, repairing fences, rearranging firewood stacks, and preparing for the next meal. Movement alternates with brief returns to the fire to conserve heat, a delicate balance that defines daily life. Humor creeps back as you negotiate small domestic politics: who gets the prime spot near the fire, or which animal must yield temporarily. Survival is as much diplomacy as it is physical labor. By mid-morning, sunlight barely reaches the frozen ground, but the household hums with warmth, rhythm, and quiet efficiency. The routine repeats, layering observation, action, and vigilance, reinforcing a subtle choreography that allows life to endure in harsh conditions. And as you glance around, noting the smoke-streaked walls, settled animals, and bundled children, you feel a measured satisfaction. Winter is still harsh, but today, like every day, survival is achieved through persistence, routine, and shared warmth. Afternoon arrives, pale and fragile, and the weak winter sunlight stretches across frost-glazed fields. You step outside briefly, boots crunching against icy soil, to check fences and pathways. A mainstream historical fact: peasants meticulously maintained boundaries and structural elements during winter, as failing fences could allow animals to wander or predators to approach, while damaged paths increased the risk of accidents on frozen ground. Every action is deliberate, each motion measured against exposure and fatigue. The wind bites sharply, forcing quick, efficient movement. You carry chopped firewood or buckets of water, careful to conserve energy while completing essential tasks. Humor drifts quietly as you imagine someone today navigating these conditions without modern gear. They would likely fail spectacularly. Yet here, adaptation, layering, and experience allow movement with surprising effectiveness. The cold is relentless, but not unbeatable. Animals are tended next. Chickens peck at grain scattered in straw bedding. Pigs burrow into piles of straw for warmth. Goats huff and nudge each other into optimal spots. Their body heat contributes significantly to the household's microclimate. Historians still debate how common indoor livestock arrangements were across Europe, but northern villages clearly relied on shared warmth as a survival tactic. You instinctively adjust positions, nudging animals, and reorganizing straw for maximum heat retention. Inside, the fire requires attention. Embers glow faintly, coaxed back to life with small twigs and logs. Smoke rises slowly, filling the room with the familiar pungent aroma of soot, straw, and wood. Quirky tibbing: some households sprinkled ash or powdered herbs around the hearth to mask odors, repel insects, or even ward off spirits. Scholars still debate whether these rituals were effective or symbolic, but their psychological benefit is unquestionable, helping people feel control over their environment in a harsh, unpredictable season. Dinner is simple, served quietly. Thick porridge, grains, salted meat, and preserved vegetables sustain bodies through long, dark nights. Portions are carefully rationed, ensuring that stores last and energy remains sufficient. Humor surfaces gently as a child attempts to sneak extra bread, a reminder that subtle negotiations over resources are a daily reality. Meals are survival, social cohesion, and ritual all in one. Late afternoon chores involve minor repairs, adjusting straw bedding, replenishing water, checking fences, and moving firewood. Movement is interspersed with pauses near the hearth to regain warmth. Frostbite remains a subtle threat, and careful observation of yourself, others, and animals is critical. Historians still debate the extent to which peasant winter routines were rigid versus improvisational, but the evidence suggests a blend habit reinforced by observation and immediate necessity. By evening, shadows lengthen, the fire glows warmly, and the household settles into quiet rhythm. Heat, smoke, animals, and careful layering converge into a microclimate of survival. Each ember stoked, every shift of straw or body, each measured movement contributes to endurance. Humor, ritual, and observation weave seamlessly into daily life, sustaining both physical and mental resilience. Winter is harsh, but tonight, like every night, life persists through careful, communal, and almost meditative effort. Night fully envelops the household, and the world outside becomes a quiet, frozen expanse. Inside, the hearth remains the heart of warmth, its embers casting a gentle glow that flickers across the suit's streaked walls and the bundled bodies resting nearby, and livelihoods. A mainstream historical fact: medieval peasants depended on the fire not just for warmth, but for light, cooking, and even some level of social interaction during long winter nights. The hearth was a focal point of life, a shared center of comfort and vigilance. And livelihoods, you adjust your position on mattress, feeling the slight shift of wool and linen layers, ensuring that every inch of your body is protected from the creeping cold. The animals are nestled close as well, their presence adding a layer of warmth that extends the comfort of the fire. Historians still debate how indoor animal sheltering influenced not only warmth, but also the social fabric of peasant life. But the practical benefits are clear. Shared heat is a vital strategy. The air inside is a blend of smoke, straw, and wool, an aroma that becomes comforting over time. Quirky tidbit: some households would even place small bundles of herbs in bedding to keep pests away and perhaps to ward off illness. Whether these practices had a measurable effect or were mostly psychological, they contributed to the feeling of control and care in a harsh environment. It's a blend of practicality and tradition woven into daily life. Sleep comes in uneven intervals, punctuated by the need to adjust, shift, or tend to the fire. You learn to listen to the subtle sounds around you, the soft breathing of children, the occasional snuffle of a pig, the gentle cluck of a chicken. Each sound is a reassurance that life persists, that survival is a communal effort. And livelihoods. Historians still debate quality of sleep in medieval times under such conditions, but the rhythm of shared warmth and careful positioning suggests a form of rest that, while not luxurious, is sufficient. The fire's glow dims as the night progresses, but you carefully maintain the embers, blowing gently to coax warmth without wasting fuel. The room becomes a cocoon of heat and comfort, fragile but effective. Humor subtly surfaces. The goat's insistence on the warmest corner is a recurring theme, and you smile at the persistence of this small, daily negotiation. Even in the harshest conditions, these moments of lightness persist. As the hours pass, the household maintains its steady rhythm of warmth and vigilance. The subtle dance of positioning, humans, animals, and fire, creates a microclimate that defies the cold. Every ember, every layer of wool, every shared breath is part of the intricate web of survival. Historians still debate how much of this was conscious strategy versus instinct. but the effectiveness is undeniable. By the time the first hints of dawn begin to creep across the sky, the household remains a testament to resilience. The fire, though reduced to embers, still provides a comforting glow. The animals, the children, and the adults are all part of this delicate balance of warmth and endurance. Winter is unyielding, but tonight, as always, survival is achieved through careful attention, shared effort, and the enduring human spirit. And as you finally drift into a deeper sleep, enveloped in the warmth of the hearth and the presence of those around you, you understand that this cycle of life, labor, warmth, vigilance, and rest, is the essence of enduring the harshest of winters.